Good evening, I'm Dennis Ward. Welcome to APTN National News. Millions of dollars. We already knew that's how much Ontario Provincial Police spent during their 1492 land back operation 2 years ago. But the OPP tried to retract already released records and alter figures to hide the real cost. After months of fighting for them, the uncensored numbers were obtained exclusively by APTN's Brett Forster. Here's Brett to explain.
This is how the Ontario Provincial Police spent much of 2020 through 2021 in Caledonia. Manning barricades, idling in cruisers, and patrolling the streets surrounding the 1492 Land Back Lane camp. Now, figures obtained exclusively by APTN reveal how much money they spent. Nearly $21 million.
Those numbers, they just don't, I think they're just so astronomical that, it's hard to even put it into context.
Skylar Williams is the spokesman for the Land Back group. The numbers left him stunned.
It's a far cry from what I think of when I think of reconciliation.
The OPP initially tried to hide these numbers and only released them following a lengthy fight in the Freedom of Information system. Last year, APTN reported the police spent more than $16 million in just 6 months. But the OPP soon tried to retract that document and replace it with a censored one containing altered figures. When APTN requested a year's worth of costs,
they released this document claiming police only spent $14 million. But its top line, showing how much was paid in salaries, was deleted, meaning the total was wrong. This uncensored version was disclosed after APTN appealed to the province's information commissioner. It shows the force actually spent almost $21 million. The bulk of it, $18.2 million, went towards salaries and overtime. The rest went to other expenses like transportation, food, and hotels. Williams calls it more evidence Indigenous resistance is over-policed.
And we see this across, every Indigenous movement that has happened to protect our lands, protect our waters. This exact same kind of response around trying to cover up the fact that they're watching everything. There's a lot of questions that I would like to have answered that I know are never going to be answered.
The figures left Courtney Skye, like Williams, with questions and little hope of answers.
You see them trying to hide it because once you see those numbers laid out, it just becomes so clear that the priorities of the Crown are wrong. They're set on oppression. They're set on just using their powers to inflict violence on communities.
She says governments need to be held accountable for making the guys with guns the lead agency in a centuries-old land dispute, then giving them a blank check.
That $20 million hasn't solved the problem. It hasn't dealt with the root cause of the issue. Of course, it's wasted. We're not actually addressing the underlying issues.
The OPP responded by statement saying they couldn't ignore the potential for violence or illegal activity. The force never offered a legal reason for withholding information, only that they'd rather not report the regular wages officers earned while working on the file. Brett Forster, APTN National News, Ottawa.
Thanks, Brett. Great work. For the second day in a row in Parliament, NDP MP Leah Gazan expressed frustration with the federal government for failing to confirm whether Winnipeg would receive new funding for a women's safe shelter. This comes on the heels of the deaths of 3 Indigenous women in the city in recent weeks. Last week, the government announced $121 million to build and repair 430 shelter spaces across the country.
The government a very straightforward question and that warranted a very straightforward answer. I did not get that. I rise again today because of the gravity of the situation. Yesterday, I found out a third Indigenous woman was murdered in Winnipeg this month. She was the mother of 4. Women are dying in Winnipeg, ground zero for MMIWG. So I will ask again, will the minister confirm last week's funding announcement includes a low barrier 24 safe space as requested by my community? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday's news is indeed part of the ongoing tragedy in this country of missing murdered Indigenous women and girls. The announcement last week will create the infrastructure necessary to operate a facility that will be welcoming for people that are in distress. And as to the member opposite's current request, that is part of many, it is clearly one that needs priority and is something that we support as a government.
Well, meanwhile, it's been nearly a month since the horrific discovery of a young woman who was reported missing in 2020. Now her family want answers to what happened to her. APTN's Tina House was at a rally held in Vancouver where she was found.
I say justice, you say for Chelsea. Justice! For Chelsea! Justice! For Chelsea! Justice!
It was here outside of this mansion that the skeletal remains of Chelsea Poorman was found. The 24-year-old was reported missing on September the 8th, 2020 from Drake and Granville Street after a night out with her sister Paige. Paige says they got separated that night, and when she called Chelsea to ask her where she went, Chelsea told her that she had met a new bae and that everything was okay. That was the last time anyone heard from her. Vancouver police announced that her death was not suspicious, but her family and supporters in the community do not agree with that.
No more! No more!
Today, over 100 people gathered outside of where she was found, including Chelsea's mom, Sheila. They are here to demand answers as to what really happened to Chelsea.
Right now, I'd like for the people who knew what happened here to come forward, to let us know exactly what happened to Chelsea. I'd like for the Vancouver City Police to acknowledge, what they've done wrong in this investigation.
And the families say what was mishandled was the fact that the Vancouver police did not inform the public about her disappearance for 10 days after her family reported her missing. They also claim that the police never searched surveillance from the area. And after her discovery just over a month ago, Chelsea was missing her head and some fingers and was found covered by a blanket outside in the back of this mansion. Her mother has a heartbreaking plea to everyone in this neighborhood.
I would like for those neighbors around here to, I know it's too late now for them to do something, but I think right now what they can do is look in their backyards, look in their gardens, see if they found, part of her skull that's missing, to see if they found any of her finger bones, if they remember anything that night, to come forward.
Ruth McPhee does live in the neighborhood. She heard about what happened here and wanted to come and lend her support to the family.
I felt great sorrow for her family and for her, and I felt kind of ashamed of our neighborhood that we didn't notice that she was there, because there would have been signs that she was there. What happened to her, of course, I don't know, and that should be identified, but mostly I felt like we weren't aware enough about what was going on in our neighborhood.
The crowd left from the house and began to march down Granville Street to downtown, where she was last seen, putting posters up along the way to try and find answers. Shockingly, someone who was in the march shot this cell phone video of an unknown man walking behind everyone, taking the posters down without any explanation.
Why are you offended over this?
Justice for Chelsea! Justice for Chelsea!
More rallies are planned for the near future, and the family is going to continue asking what really happened to Chelsea Poorman.
This is suspicious. There was something that happened to her, and somebody does know what happened to Chelsea. Somebody brought her here. So I want that person to come forward, and I want them, to know that I'm not mad. I just want answers.
Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
First Nations from Ontario to Alberta are gathering in Saskatoon this week. They've formed a collective voice on child welfare. That story and more coming up after the break. Welcome back. Nunavut's Legislative Assembly is back in session. During the break, all three Northern premiers met with the Prime Minister about Arctic sovereignty, especially in light of Russia's attack on Ukraine and Russia being the North's circumpolar neighbor. Nunavut's Premier reported back to the Assembly this week on just what the Northern premiers were pushing to Ottawa. When you think sovereignty, you may think military boots on the ground. Northern leaders have long maintained that thriving communities in the North are what build sovereignty, and that's the pitch they brought to Ottawa. Nunavut's Premier explains.
And in that meeting, I joined the other Northern premiers in outlining the importance of building strong, resilient communities and stable infrastructure in asserting sovereignty in the North. We discussed our shared commitment to ensure Northern and Arctic communities remain thriving, strong, and safe. We also stressed the need for investments in housing, infrastructure, healthcare, and mental health, and climate change.
Nations groups from Saskatchewan, Ontario, Alberta, and Manitoba have come together to create a collective voice on child welfare. The National Assembly of Remote Communities is meeting in Saskatoon this week. The Assembly says Canada has failed youth and families for decades. And while the $20 billion child welfare compensation package announced last year was welcomed, the Assembly says it will create other issues they've seen come out of past compensation deals. Federation of Sovereign Indigenous Nations Vice Chief David Pratt says they are concerned about how the young people receiving these payouts will cope.
Suddenly a vulnerable person, suffering unresolved trauma, has multiple addictions issues around drugs or alcohol. Well, suddenly when they're dropped 180,000 or 200,000 on them and they're not capable of being responsible or they have addictions issues, and we heard about this through the past payments, the past compensation packages, where a number of people who weren't at a good place in their healing journey basically drank and drugged themselves to death and had nothing to show for it.
Dr. Alika Lafontaine has a long list of accomplishments. The Cree Métis physician is an award winner and advocate for equality in Indigenous health, and he is the first Indigenous physician to be elected as president of the Canadian Medical Association. Daryl Stranger spoke with Dr. Lafontaine earlier.
Dr. Lafontaine, thank you so much for joining us here today, and congratulations on your new position.
Thanks so much.
Now, you're stepping into the appointment at a time when healthcare is in a crisis due to the pandemic. So what is it going to take to improve the system?
I think there's two big things that have to happen in the next year. The first is that we have to start thinking about health outside of when we need it immediately. I think a lot of times those visits to our doctors or those visits to the hospital, they're not really front of mind unless we're actually sick. And so for First Nation, Métis, and Inuit people, we really know what it's like to not have access to healthcare or to go for healthcare and not get the kind of care that we want. Canadians in general are just starting to realize how that feels. And so making sure that people have healthcare front of mind is really important. The second is that we need to move out of these mimetic, kind of blunt arguments. Things aren't fully good, they're not fully bad. We have to have a more nuanced approach. And I think there's a lot for us to do in the coming year.
So challenges for equitable access to healthcare in Indigenous communities, continues to exist. How do we begin to close those gaps?
I think understanding what the system does currently for people who have better access is really important. When we talk about equity, it's not only providing the same amount of money, but it's also providing the same sort of access. And so you take, like a resource development camp, like a lumber camp or an oil and gas camp close to a First Nation, they get 24/7 physician coverage. There's plans for evacuation if something happens to someone within the camp. While, the First Nation community that's right nearby doesn't have the same sorts of things. And so we have to have people have the same access to types of services. We also just have to acknowledge that we haven't invested in infrastructure around First Nation, Métis, and Inuit communities in the same way that we've done in other places in Canada. And so we need creative solutions, and I think communities are at the heart of where those solutions are and what will actually work on the ground.
All right, and racism has been another issue faced by Indigenous people across the country, and with the use of social media, it's been seen firsthand, but it's also subtle. So how do you change systemic racism, and what can a patient do to protect themselves?
Mm-hmm. So I think systemic racism is sometimes too big of a problem to chunk into pieces that we can actually solve. At the end of the day, racism is about the interaction that I have with patients or that another provider has with patients. And we can make changes in that today if we wanted to. One of the things that we've learned over the past couple of years with things that have come out into the news, Joyce Echaquan was a story that really touched the hearts of a lot of Canadians across the country, as have other examples that continue to happen, have happened in the past. One of the things that I found most chilling about learning about that story was just seeing in the video people's disregard for being seen. It was like they just felt that things were okay and to provide care in that sort of way. And I think some of that is, just the culture of medicine that we live in right now. It's okay to treat certain people certain ways. We need to change that. But I think another part is just becoming aware of it. I don't think that providers in the health system are always aware of what's happening to patients. And because of the legacy that we've inherited historically, sometimes Indigenous patients don't speak up because they're afraid of what will happen because bad things have happened in the past, and we have to fix that too.
No, certainly, and some provinces like Quebec continue to not acknowledge systemic racism even exists in their healthcare system. What can you do to change some of those attitudes?
One of the things that I think you've seen in the Canadian Medical Association that'll continue under my term in the next year is an acknowledgement that racism is real. It exists across systems. I think you've seen pushes from health systems across the country, and Quebec, I think, is an outlier when it comes to not acknowledging systemic racism. We need to move past that argument to now finding places where it's most intense. Racism exists everywhere, but is it a big enough problem that we have to dedicate an enormous amount of resources towards solving those problems? I think that our patients understand where these things happen. They understand places where they're safe, places that they're unsafe. That's the next step in the conversation and something that I'm really interested in being a part of.
All right, Dr. Lafontaine, we'll have to leave it there, but thank you so much again for taking a few minutes, and congratulations again on your new position.
Thanks for having me.
Time to step aside for another quick break. Coming up, a special birthday for a special elder. Stick around. Welcome back. Time now for our photo of the day. Our viewer Sheldon Sumac is an avid kayaker and was able to get this picture during a recent overnight trip along the Saskatchewan River, where he saw these nesting eagles. For the chance to be featured as our next photo of the day, email your photos to share@aptn.ca. Now let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the east coast, 18 and sunny in Halifax, 10 with clouds in Charlottetown. A chance of snow and a high of 2 in Nain, sunny and 12 in Kuujjuaq. 18 with rain in Montreal, 29 and sunny in Val-d'Or. 28 with showers in Sault Ste. Marie, rain, and 25 in North Bay. A cloudy 18 for Thunder Bay, showers and 19 in Sioux Lookout. 9 with rain in God's Lake, 8 and showers in Norway House. Sunny and 19 in Winnipeg, 16 under the sun in Dauphin. 19 and sunny for Estevan, Regina, Saskatoon, and North Battleford. 19 in Meadow Lake, 13 in La Ronge. In northern Alberta, 21 in Fort McMurray, 22 for Grand Prairie. 20 with showers in Edmonton, 20 in Lethbridge. 21 in Victoria and Vancouver. Showers in 21 for Prince George, sunny and 22 in Dease Lake. 20 with rain in Old Crow, sunny and 23 for Whitehorse. 18 in Yellowknife, 21 in Norman Wells. 0 with a chance of snow in Sax Harbor, 8 in Pawlatuck. 3 with showers in Chesterfield and Baker Lake. -4 with snow in Resolute, 2 and snow in Arctic Bay. Across Canada, and especially in places like the Yukon, the number of fluent language speakers is declining. Now, Yukon First Nations Language Department is using smartphone technology to teach its language to young speakers. Here's Sarah Connors with that story.
It's language learning with convenience. This newly released Casca Cards app has around 700 words and phrases, everything from animals to introductions. The app was developed by the Liard First Nation in Watson Lake, Yukon. It's a tool being used by the First Nations Language Department as the number of fluent Casca speakers is dwindling. Casca language worker Emerald Pope says an app is a great way to reach young people in the age of smartphones.
And then a lot of the youth who haven't exactly been exposed to the language this way, they can just pull the app out of their pocket, their phone out of their pocket and check out the app.
The app works like a set of flashcards. Users listen to elders speaking and can choose from around 40 decks of cards on topics like plants and morning routines. Paul Caesar Jules says the language department recently celebrated the app's release at the community's high school to rave reviews.
A lot of people were happy with it, and they were understanding, hey, I know this word. And it really intrigued them that they downloaded and they were learning about the certain cards that were on the app.
You can find the Casca Cards app on the App Store or Google Play. Sarah Connors, APTN National News, Whitehorse.
Over the weekend, the Southeast Resource Development Council's mental wellness team threw a centennial birthday celebration for Elder Winnie Spence from Peguis First Nation. Spence and fellow residents of the Peguis Care Home have been staying at the Southeast Wellness Lodge since being evacuated at the start of May due to flooding. A drum group and dancers provided an opening song and entertainment for Spence and her guests. Spence was also presented a star blanket at the celebration. Happy birthday, Winnie. Water protector Autumn Pelche is our guest on the season finale of Face to Face tonight, coming up right after the news. Pelche rose to prominence in 2016 when she was just 12 years old, when she criticized Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to his face about decisions on pipelines at an Assembly of First Nations meeting. Pelche is concerned how little has changed since 2016.
Considering how fast the past like 8 years have went by, and like considering how much did not change is really sad to me, to be honest. Like, I don't want to be doing this until the day I die. I mean, like, I will if I have to, but I shouldn't have to, that's the thing. And like my Auntie Josephine, she passed away with not seeing what she wanted to see, and that's really sad to me. And like, if I've dedicated my entire life to doing this and nothing changes, I'm going to be pretty upset with that too.
You can catch our entire interview with Autumn Peltier in less than 2 minutes time. We're all out of time for this Tuesday. For much more, visit our website, aptnnews.ca. I'm Dennis Ward. Thanks for being with us. Stick around for Face to Face. That's next. Have a great night.